decisions. And now, Financial Renaissance with the M's.
Good morning, financial knowledge seekers. So happy to be here with you on this 4th of July weekend. It is a celebration of our country, and it makes me very happy. You know, you could say anything that you want to say about America. It's got its good things, it's got its bad things, it's got things that make us feel ashamed and uncomfortable, etc. But I guarantee you this, I wouldn't have wanted to be born in any other country other than the country I was born in. So I am proud to be an American with all its good, with all its bad, just like my family. Love my family, but with all its good, with all its bad, with all the crazy, I'm glad I was born into that family. And a little bit about my folks. My family immigrated into this country in the early 1960s, right? And so there was a lot going on in the country in the early 1960s. My father and his people came from Haiti. That was the first black country in the Western Hemisphere, right? And so there's a lot of stuff that's going to go along with that as I talk about the economics of the Revolutionary War and the economics of our country, how our country started. My mother came from Costa Rica, her parents came from Jamaica, and again, people came to this country for a better life and for an opportunity not to just kind of be in that status quo. But one of the things I can tell you about the 4th of July that really, really had me kind of sad is my first recollection of the 4th of July. I don't remember how old I was, 6 or 7, but it was the bicentennial, 1976, our country's 200th year anniversary. And it was the bicentennial celebration in New York City. And when I tell you the city was on fire, it was alive. Everyone was running around with the Betsy Ross 13-starred flags, the 50-starred flags. Everyone was running around with just a pride of being American. And I was in Battery Park. You know, there was all types of food vendors and people selling stuff and everybody wearing like the three-pointed, you know, colonial hats. And it was just so much flavor going on, right? And I thought that every 4th of July was going to be exactly like our bicentennial celebration. So I got to tell you, I was sorely disappointed because after that, it was like more like barbecues, backyard barbecues, and not as much American flair. But in my heart, when I think of 4th of July, I always think back to 1976 and that awesome celebration that our country had. I was able to watch the fireworks, you know, looking out, I guess it was the Hudson River, looking out at the Statue of Liberty and things like that. I got to spend a 4th of July in our nation's capital of D.C. I lived in D.C. in the early, like mid-90s and got to see celebrations there. So wherever you are in the country, wherever your celebration is, no matter what, you should be happy and proud to be an American. I'm telling you, we're in the greatest country in the world because we get to change what we like, what we don't like about the country. We just have to take a couple of steps, okay? And what we're going to be talking about today are the couple of steps that our founding fathers and mothers, they're kind of, you know, written out of the history books, but we know that they were there, as well as the slaves, the African slaves, the Native Americans that were here. Everybody had something to do with our country being as great as it is today. And so we're going to be celebrating the taxation. We're going to be celebrating economics. We're going to be celebrating our Constitution. But next up, what we're going to be looking at is that Yankee fitted. That's right, that New York Yankee symbol that we so proudly hold on to and what its roots were in when we come back in 300 seconds. And we are back with Financial Renaissance with the M's. That's right. You are listening to us live on ssnatl.com. And if you're watching us on Facebook, you are watching us on Sensation Station Network. Go ahead and like the page, and then you can drop your comments in the comment section. And if you want to text us, you can text us at 678-613-5857. Before the break, I was talking a little bit about, you know, the 4th of July. This is the revolutionary celebration of our country, right? And so before the break, we were talking, I spoke a little bit about the Yankee hat and the symbolism of the Yankee hat. And we got to go back a couple hundred years, almost 250 years. Let's go back to early colonial times. And when we think about the foundation of the United States of America, we have to realize that the United States of America was founded by the Brits. Okay, so Great Britain, the Great British Empire. And so the people that were in America, in the early colonies, the hierarchy started with the British and everybody else kind of fell underneath the Brits. So the Dutch were also in New York. There's a lot of stuff named after the Dutch in New York. But in New York, the British did not look or regard the Dutch as the same as the Brits. They looked at them as a couple of steps down. And they used a derogatory term for the Dutch, and they called it junkie. And the J in Dutch is pronounced with the Y in English. So the Dutch name John is junkie, and so they used the terminology Yankee, which turned into our Yankee, as a symbol of, well, they used to use the term to describe somebody as being stupid. So the term Yankee that we use and that we embrace really came from a derogatory term about someone not being the same or less than or not as smart. And again, there's a lot of words that we use in American culture that came from kind of a negative place, and the people have decided to embrace it and use it on their own. And so with the terminology Yankee, there's one of the things I want you to think about. So if you were out of the country and someone called you a stupid American or a stupid Yankee, you would take a little bit of offense to it, right? But here in the States, if someone calls you a stupid Yankee, it doesn't make any sense. It doesn't matter unless you're a northerner and somebody from the South is calling you a stupid Yankee. So I want you to think about that term. When we're talking about our country, we all feel the same way, okay? So when we see that Yankee hat, it symbolizes something about our pride, about our ambition, about our resilience, and about the fact that we don't take stuff from our government. That's what the principles that our country was founded on, is when things start happening and we're not properly represented, that Yankee hat is a symbol, just like the American flag is a symbol. So when you see people wearing that Yankee hat, the New York Yankee symbol, you have to know that they are also proud Americans, whether they realize it or not. That symbol is as recognized around the world as Coca-Cola and McDonald's and a lot of the other well-known name brands in our world. So when we do hear people talk about Yankees and things of that nature, when we hear Southerners talk about Yankees, it really just means that they don't feel that people from the North are a part of them. It's kind of like an outsider thing. But again, Southerners also have to realize that, the Yankees are just as part of this great nation as the Southerners are. So we'll see how that goes. All right, let's jump into British history and what happened with the Revolutionary War. Back in the 17th century, so this is like the 1600s, the British were running around the world, basically, kicking butt and taking names. So what the British decided to do was everywhere that they went that they were able to conquer, they ended up taking over. So the British Empire was out there colonizing everything. They were over 5 different continents and the Caribbean. So they were in the Americas, they had taken over. Africa, they had taken over parts. Northern India, they had taken over parts. Eventually China, and then also the Caribbean islands they were involved in. And the British, for close to 200 years, and this is going to sound very familiar, a lot of things that I'm going to tell you about the Brits has tenets and ties into what we do today as Americans. After the break, we're going to go back into the history of taxation. We're also going to learn about why Great Britain was so dope. Why were they the rulers of the throne? And then in my top 5 stories later on, I'm going to talk about Jay-Z and how he halted illegal arbitration because he did not have the proper representation. When we come back in 200 seconds. Sunday mornings with Financial Renaissance with the M's. It is me, your host, Emma Folks, certified financial planner by day. On the weekends, I bring messages from Washington and Wall Street right here to Main Street for everybody in our country. And today we are celebrating, still continuing our celebration of the 4th of July. And we're going to continue our conversation. We're going to talk about taxation. Can taxation really start a revolution? And then we're going to look into the cost of world dominance. Does it cost to run the world? And then we're going to look at us as Americans and the economic rebellion that we had. But first up, let's dig into where Great Britain was in the 1600s. Now, We know what they were doing as far as the slave trade and a lot of other things, but let's dig into what happened to form this great country that we have here today. So in the late 1600s to the mid 1700s, the Great Britain was running around like the Lannisters and the Baratheons of Game of Thrones. They were literally just kicking butt and acquiring new lands. And all the new lands that they acquired, people had to kiss the ring of the crown. Your riches are now my riches. That's right. If they took over, everything that you had now belonged to them. Okay? So the British Empire was out there colonizing everything. As I said, the Americas, Africas, India, Northern India, China's, and the Caribbean. So for close to 200 years, Great Britain was at war with France. They were beefing, and it had global rippling effects. So the Brits had a 9-year war. And this is all within like the 1700s. The War of Spanish Succession, the War of Austrian Succession, the 7-Year War. And the 7-Year War was kind of jumped off by the French-Indian War. And the 7-Year War is so important to us because it is pivotal in what happened to us here in America and how America started. So the 7-Year War, France got spanked by the Brits, okay? And what really ended up happening is during the 7-Year War, the world, and they want to kind of call it a world, the First World War, but I'm sure there were others, everybody teamed up. So you were either down with the Kingdom of Great Britain or you were down with the Kingdom of France. And just for you to know, Russia was also part of Team France. So when we think about the relations that we have politically and globally with other countries, some of those alliances and those beefs started way back before we were even thought of. So I'm talking back in the 1700s. So part of what happened during the 7-Year War, France, as I said, got beat, but they had to give up some land. So when you lose a war, you have to give some stuff up. So France ceded Louisiana and its territories west of the Mississippi River to Spain. France also ceded its possessions of some territory east of the Mississippi, so between the Allegheny Mountains and the Mississippi River, those lands went to the United States. Now, let's go back. If you were a wealthy colonist and you found out that we had just won a portion of land between the Mississippi River and the Allegheny Mountains, what would be going through your head right now? And whatever's going through your head right now is possibly the reason why the Revolutionary War started. So France also had to cede most of Canada to Great Britain, the island of Grenada, and again, the northern part of India also went to Great Britain. Now, one of the other moves that happened, and again, anytime there is a war, it is really about economics. And it's racks on racks on racks, stacks on stacks on stacks. Spain also had to cede Florida to Great Britain. So when we look at why, we have issues with parts of the Spanish speakers in Florida, when we look at why we have issues with Spanish speakers on the West Coast, remember, France ceded west of the Mississippi River to Spain. So that's going to tie into some of the issues that we have. Some of the other things, and these have to do with where we go for vacation. 4 neutral Caribbean islands also got split up between Great Britain and France. We Yanks know these islands well. St. Vincent, Tobago, Dominica went to Great Britain, and St. Lucia went to France. So again, Great Britain was out there body blowing people. I mean, slamming people left and right. They were the world dominant power. When we come back, in 250 seconds, we're going to look at sneaker and luxury brand stock moves. Then we're going to determine whether or not the Constitution is our economic template and still dig into why Florida and the West are so Spanish. Yeah, that's some 4th of July backyard music, right? Yeah. So today we're going to deepen our financial knowledge this morning on Financial Renaissance with the M's. We are focusing on the birth of our nation, Nat Turner style. That's right. So we're going to look into what happens to kind of spoiled people when they have to start working and contributing to the overall collective. I'm also going to be talking about today how to emotionally prepare yourself and your child for college before you send them on their way. And I may tell you even a touching story about me and my son and why I think this topic is important. But first, let's talk a little bit about what the colonists were doing at the time that Great Britain was out there, you know, kicking butt and taking names. So Great Britain also provided protection for the colonies, meaning, you know, at the time there was Portugal, Spain, France, that were going all over, the Dutch that were going all over the world, and any land that they could beat, they would take it. Okay, so the United States or the colonies had protection from Great Britain. So the colonists had their cake and they were eating it too, because unlike a lot of the other countries that were part of Team Great Britain, and benefited from the protection of Great Britain's world-renowned Navy and Army, the people in the colonies, unlike everyone else, paid relatively very low taxes. And I want you to think about that, because you're going to hear this theme in a lot of stuff that we talk about. Relatively low taxes. Unlike the other people under the protection of the crown, the colonists were able to engage in domestic and economic activity without the crown taking a cut. So in the United States, between the states, any trading with the Native Americans, any trading, the British government had nothing to do with it. They didn't take any money, they didn't tax. We were able to do everything that we wanted. But like the others, the colonists only had to adhere to foreign trade and regulations and policy. So Great Britain had been treating us like family. Like, you know, hey, you're part of our household, so a lot of the stuff that we do to everyone else, we're not doing to you, you know, you're kind of under our wing. But then in the 1760s, they flipped the script on us and they tweaked the Navigation Act. So the Brits got upset. The citizens of Great Britain were upset because they were being taxed and paying heavy taxes to make sure that the people in the colonies were protected. But the people in the colonies, again, weren't paying their fair share. So Great Britain came up with the Navigation Act, and so that meant that all trade that was conducted within the empire, so that's anywhere that Great Britain owned, had to be conducted on ships constructed, owned, and managed by British citizens. So let that sink in. So you're telling me if I want to ship some molasses to Jamaica, I now have to do that on a British-built, owned, and operated ship? What about my own people? So that started cutting into the American or the colonists, bottom line. The other thing they did was they said that all tobacco, indigo, which, you know, was used to make like blue-colored clothing, sugar, rice, rum, and molasses, had to hit the shore of Great Britain or England first before it went anywhere else in the world. So let's think about this from an economic standpoint. Remember, we didn't have FedEx and UPS and things like that. Stuff actually went out on ships, like they do today, but the ships didn't have motors, they had sails, so it took very, very long. So again, if you're in Georgia and you wanted to ship something to the Caribbean, that shipment had to go to England first and then back to the Caribbean. So that's a lot of money. Okay, so those are some of the things that started happening, that started getting the colonists really angry. In school, you know, when we were young, we were taught that the Revolutionary War started because of a tax on tea. And that was only half right. There were two things that happened that really upset the colonists. The first was the Western land policy. Now remember when I said that France had to give up its rights to everything east of the Mississippi up to the Allegheny Mountains? Well, a lot of colonists, when they found out about that, they started making plans for what they were going to do with that land. They started claiming rights to the land. They started trying to build on the land, all of that stuff. Now, mind you, Great Britain owns it, not the colonists. So the first smackdown was the Western land policy, when Great Britain told the colonists that they were not allowed to settle, trade, or do any business along that, you know, west of the Allegheny Mountains. The other thing that they did was they set up 10,000 troops along the Allegheny Mountain line to make sure that the colonists did not spread into the new land that was acquired. So to add insult to injury, the Brits also decided that any forts that were built along for those troops ended up being the centers for trade with the Native Americans. And that really, really upset the colonists because, again, you're messing with their ability to earn money. So then the citizens of Great Britain, again, were upset because they were paying higher taxes than the colonists. So the British decided that they were going to issue, in order to pay for the 10,000 troops that they sent to the colonies, they issued the Stamp Act of 1764, the Sugar Act, the Quartering Act. And this Quartering Act is, I could definitely see how they got angry. So the Brits brought the 10,000 troops over to make sure we didn't spread west of the Allegheny Mountains. But then they said, hey, this quartering act meant that the colonists had to pay for all the British Army's housing, all of their food, and all of their transportation. So let's get this straight. You bring in troops to tell us we can't move forward or move west, but now we have to pay for those troops that are supposed to stop us from moving west? You could see how that's going to cause a little bit of issues. So in true Yankee spirit, the colonists peacefully boycotted, they petitioned, they lobbied, and I'm now thinking that lobbying is the world's second oldest profession. I think we know what the first is, but I didn't know they had lobbyists back then. So the peaceful protest got the Brits to repeal the new taxes, the Stamp Act, the Sugar Act, things of that nature. The Quartering Act, they even said that they would repeal. So the only thing they left on the table was tea. They wanted to make sure that tea got properly taxed. So if this is sounding familiar to you, think about this. The colonists were paying the lowest taxes. They were able to enjoy the freedom of liberty and liberty of being protected by the British government. When there was a war, they didn't have to really do anything. The British had their own army, their own navy. Colonists didn't have to do much other than just sit there. But the thing that we all need to realize, and even in today's world, because we've had a war going on since the since the 2000s, is that when there is a war, everybody must sacrifice. Either you sacrifice your body or you sacrifice your bounty, meaning your wallet. Some way, somehow, there has to be a sacrifice made. And that was what the British were trying to tell the colonists back then. And so, again, we didn't have social media. So although the colonists heard that these acts were repealed, they wouldn't have to pay extra taxes, the Brits kind of did a bait and switch on us. The same time that they repealed those acts, they put into place the declaratory acts, and that kind of brought everything back in full force. They doubled down on what they were going to do to the colonists, and that just set off a whole slew of stuff. So again, the Brits were providing in a lot of cases, money, financing. The Brits sent, if you remember, I think it was last week, we talked about the three types of people that the Brits had kind of broken their citizens down into. They had those who could work, those who could not work because they were indigent or disabled, and then they had the idle poor, the people who didn't seem to want to work. So the Brits sent the idle poor, people who were laying on their streets, to the colonies. So a lot of the colonists were either second sons who weren't going to inherit anything and decided they wanted to make a name for themselves, so they came to the Americas, they came to the colonies. And then we had the people that really weren't doing much in Great Britain anyway. Some of them had been in jail for not paying their debts, or they were just, vagrants. They were just trying to take advantage of the system. So they sent those people to the Americas. And so now these people, the second sons, the idle poor, the people who didn't really want to work, were being protected by Great Britain, but they didn't want to pay more taxes to take advantage of all that Great Britain had done. So that caused a lot of issues. But Great Britain did a kind of a bait and switch on us, right? They decided that the colonists would not have a seat at the table. So we've been hearing, and you could see it on the license plates in D.C., taxation without representation. And that became a big deal because no one likes to be made a fool of. The colonists they went from peaceful protests to actually flipping stuff over, like in Jersey, what is that, Real Housewives of New Jersey. Everything changed. So we tried to do things peacefully. We sent delegates over to Great Britain to say, hey, this is how we think things should go. If you don't live here, you can't make rules here. And that's kind of the same things we're going through now, is we don't understand how politicians are making decisions about our lives when they really don't understand what's going on in our lives. So again, a lot of this stuff is history just repeating itself. So coming up on Financial Renaissance, we're going to talk about the first Continental Congress and what that did, and then why the French adopted the colonies when we come back in 250 seconds. And we are back with Financial Renaissance with the M's. We don't need any coffee this morning because I'm telling you, nothing is more exciting than watching money and movement, especially money moves in history. And just about every war that's ever been fought, it has to do with money or it has to do with a woman. Fortunately for the United States, it had to do with money. So we're going to be looking into taxation without representation. We're going to be talking about sneaker and luxury stock moves. But first, let's talk about the first Continental Congress. That's right. We're going back to sixth grade history class. So the first Continental Congress was formed because it was our first official attempt to tone down Great Britain's blatant abuse of power. You cannot tax us without us having representation. But from the British standpoint, and I want us to look at this from two different angles, okay? For the Brits, they gave us an inch by giving us this land in the colonies, and we decided we wanted to take a mile. Tomato, tomato. So we asked the Brits to take us back to 1763 before they doubled down and kind of put the squeeze on us. And we sent this a message across the pond. We had some delegates, we met in Philadelphia. All the states sent representatives, and we decided, hey, this is what we want to ask Great Britain for. We put these delegates on a ship. It took them months to get there. They got over to Great Britain. They schmoozed. They visited some brothels, some strip clubs. They ate, they danced, they whatever. And then they made a decision. They sent the delegates back on the ship and sent them back to the United States. Now, that could have taken about 9 months to a year. Okay, so messages were being sent back and forth. Now think about everything that gets lost in translation. We didn't have regular mail back then, and we didn't have social media back then. So any messages that had to go from Great Britain to the U.S. had to go via a ship. So that ship could have been lost at sea. That person could have died at sea. All types of things could have happened. So you can see where the communications barrier would have just totally been, shaken. So then the Brits basically told us to kick rocks. We're not moving anything back. We don't care what you want. So during the first Continental Congress, we had prearranged for a second meeting to happen in May of 1775 if Parliament, the Great British Parliament, didn't meet our demands. So we had the second Continental Congress. And Brits' response to the tax ease was they called in the troops. They were like, okay, you guys aren't getting it. We're going to posse up. So they sent a bunch of troops now to the colonies, and they took over the city of Boston. Now, of course, if you have two factions that aren't necessarily getting along because it has to do with money, you're asking for trouble. So, of course, they had a fight. The Brits and the people in Boston had a fight, the Battle of Lexington and Concord. There was a lot of slick talking going on. And at the Second Continental Congress, Congress authorized a Continental Army to be formed, and they also gave them the ability to purchase arms and munition. Now, during the First Continental Congress, the colonists tried to form an alliance with Canada. And they were like, hey, we should, together fight against the British. And the Canadians told the colonists to kick rocks. So during the Second Continental Congress, we drew up plans to invade Canada. That's right. You didn't want to join us, that means you're against us. So the United States forces actually invaded Quebec. There was no pump faking going on here. And the King of England declared in front of Parliament that the colonists have formed their own government and are now fighting for their independence. And that started the Revolutionary War. We invaded Canada, or part of Canada, and as our show of force. So we were, again, let's be real about who we were. We were untrained militia against the best army and navy in the world. The Brits could have chosen to attack anywhere on the eastern seaboard. We weren't ready for it, and we didn't have any money. So what the Brits did, they were like, okay, we're going to entertain this for a little while. We're only going to mess with you in the north. We're going to leave the southern states alone, and we're going to, mess with you a little bit. So the Brits, they could afford a war because they had a taxation system in place. So a taxation system in place means you can raise taxes to help pay for, ships and food and soldiers and all that stuff that comes along with war. The colonists didn't have it. And so we had the Articles of Confederation, which detail the powers granted to Congress. The Articles did state, and this is where, again, this is going to sound very familiar with our current fights between the federal government, what their powers should be, and what our state government powers should be. So in the Articles of Confederation, the states were not required to pay any taxes to help pay for this war against Great Britain. The states had actually volunteered to make payments to Congress for the war efforts. Okay? So what do you think happens when people volunteer to make payments for something? Exactly. Absolutely nothing happened. So the states had made no voluntary payments to Congress. So the Brits started, we had kind of come up with our own money. And the Brits started counterfeiting the continental dollar, and inflation spread. So it was almost like every $1 that we had, because they had overinflated or over put money into our system, $1 was now worth about 20 cents. So as the colony, we had to figure out what to do. So now let's enter the French. And remember, the French were very angry because the French lost the war against Great Britain. Remember, they had to give up all those lands, and they, kind of had to look stupid in front of the rest of the world because they lost to Great Britain. Well, the French actually signed a treaty with the colonists after we beat the British in the Battle of Saratoga in early 1778. And fearing a war with the French, the Brits negotiated a peace treaty with the Americans. So the Brits then said to us, hey, let's go back to 1763 rules. Those were the laws that we had in place. And again, this was the same thing that we went to them and we asked for in the first Continental Congress. We had asked them to bring the laws back to, the taxation back to 1763. They told us no. Now that we're aligned with the French, they're like, oh, we want to listen to you now. We'll bring the tax laws back to 1763. Well, we told them to kick rocks this time and go along. So the British continued counterfeiting our money. And then they also expanded their battle into the southern states. So for us as Americans, we started borrowing money like crazy from France. So we had to borrow money, ammunition, weapons, food. The French were basically, they funded the American Revolution. So when we look at why we have the Statue of Liberty, when we look at French fries, when we look at French toast, when we look at our affinity with France, there's a reason for it. If you look at the state of Iowa's flag is exactly the same as the French flag. Okay, slight differences, but it comes from the French flag. So a lot of what is happening in our country today have deep-seated roots from a European continental war. Okay, so French not getting along with the Brits, Spain not getting along with the Brits, Portuguese not getting along with the Brits. And so our tenets of racism and economic displacement and disparity and inequalities all come back to what happened in the 1700s. So again, we started borrowing money from the France to help gain our independence. And then, of course, we had some of the generals and higher-ups in the military kind of turn. They call them turncoats. And they became generals and colonels, et cetera, in the Continental Army. So bottom line is we won the war in 1783 with the British signing the treaty, of the Paris Treaty. The United States was granted independence, and the British troops had to withdraw from the United States. So again, the Paris Treaty was a huge economic advancement for the Americans. The British ceded to the Americas all the land east of the Mississippi and all the land west of the Mississippi that was available for settlement. Okay, so that was a big economic blow. Now, when we think today in terms of the country of Haiti, which I mentioned is where my father is from, when we think about what happened with Haiti, remember Haiti freed themselves. They, slaughtered their masters. It was a big revolt that they had. And the United States forced Haiti to repay France. And they, we look at that and they paid them in today's dollars a total of about $1 billion. They just finished paying that off not too long ago. So when we look at why the United States was so dead hard in making Haiti repay that payment, it's because we owe our country to France. Okay, so if France said, hey, these Haitians cost us a lot of money, well, guess what the United States was obligated to do? You don't get something for nothing in this world. So if somebody helps you, you know you're going to have to pay them back. And that's just kind of what happens to our politicians and everything else. But remember, there was that love triangle between Haiti, France, and the U.S., and it's still going on today. So when we hear about that, you know exactly why things are happening the way they're happening. Now, as far as the formation of our government, this is something that, I hold true, and it makes me a little happy, is about the Constitution. The full Revolutionary War was fought without an established government in place, meaning that the government was not sanctioned by all the colony states. And when we look at everything that's happening in our country, there's always turmoil, is because we've never had agreements. The other thing is, we've been fighting since 1776, and we've only had about 16 years of no war. So a lot of the monies and things that we have as a country is going right back out to fight some wars. So on the way, we're going to talk about our sneaker and luxury stock moves, and then we're going to look at what you need to do to prepare your child and to prepare yourself to leave the nest and go off to college when we come back on Financial Renaissance with the M's. And we're back with Financial Renaissance with the M's. Thank you all for joining us today. Last hour we covered the economics of the Revolutionary War and why taxation without representation is such a stick point for us here in this country. But coming up, we're going to have our stock market movers and losers, and then we're going to look at the $15 per hour wage hike increase that's been promised, and whether or not it's been bait and switched like the British did to us. But first, let's look into possibly the greatest economic doctrine of all times. That's right, the Constitution. So in the last hour, we were talking about what was happening with the formation of our government, why France decided to help us out. And again, France decided to help us out because they were being petty. They lost the war to Great Britain, and what better way to get back at your enemy than to take a piece of something away from them? Think to Donald Trump and Jeff Bezos, right? They didn't really like each other. So they ended up, kind of letting it leak out that Jeff Bezos was having an affair. Jeff Bezos' wife left him. Jeff Bezos is still rich, but it's still kind of a Game of Thrones move. Same thing. That's petty, people that have a lot of money, they play a lot of games with each other, and we were one of those games that were being played. We were just a chess piece on a board that was being moved around, and France helped us move that around and actually become a superpower. So Congress had no power to get revenue to repay the debts that were owed to France and many other people that we borrowed money from. And again, that should sound very familiar, okay? In 1787, Congress set out to revise the Articles of Confederation, and instead they amended and repealed the Articles of Confederation and put the Constitution in place as our laws of the land. Now, again, I keep saying, I get excited about it because I love everything that has to do with money. But if you actually take the time to read some of the amendments of the Constitution, you'll see that it boils down to it being an economic doctrine. Under the Constitution, we looked at problems of how things were between the states and the federal government or the national government. So the Constitution looked to resolve a lot of issues that would happen between state and the feds. So money should be printed on the federal level. No state should lend money or coin money or borrow money from other entities, and only the national government should coin money and regulate its value. And then to force the states to pay its fair share, because remember, during the war, under the Articles of Confederation, the states had decided that they would voluntarily contribute money to the war, and that did not happen. So under the Constitution, it forced the states to pay for its fair share, okay, of the war, and also it granted our national government the power of taxation. Now that right there, granting our government the power of taxation, still to this day bothers so many people. But here's what I have to say to you. If you don't like taxes, you go find another country where you can live for free. We don't pay enough taxes in this country, and we never have. A lot of people want a lot of the benefits of our federal government, but nobody wants to pay money towards our federal government. Now, part of the tax revenue that is to be collected by our national government should also be used to pay for the common defense of the United States. And there's a story that's going to be coming up about the common defense of the United States and the White House not wanting us to pay our fair share with that. And as I broke down, the economic historians, they see the Constitution as the building block for our country to be an economic powerhouse. And the Constitution set the foundational building blocks for us to have long-term growth. We were able to become entrepreneurs, so it really doesn't matter what background you came from. This is one of the few countries that if you figure out how to get the right breaks, meet the right people, you can move yourself up from poverty to a middle class and possibly a wealthy status. Now, we know that today that's a lot harder than it used to be in the past, but it's still there. And that's why we have all these people from the southern countries running up to our borders trying to get in. Again, I'm not going to get into whether or not that's a right or wrong thing. I think there's a right way for doing everything. And again, I come from a family that came to this country the right way. So my thoughts and views on immigration, forced immigration in this country is going to be a little bit different. So again, when we think about the Constitution, when we think about taxation, if you don't like the potholes in your roads, okay, I'm here in the Atlanta area. Dodging potholes is like dodging landmines. No disrespect to my military brothers and sisters, but it's irritating. You could pop a tire, you can do a whole lot of damage to your car. We have potholes because we're not paying enough in taxes. And there's another story I'm going to be talking about that's going to have to do with corporations that are raking in huge, unbelievable profits, but they're paying absolutely nothing in taxes. When we come back on Financial Renaissance with the M's, we're going to have my top 5 news stories, and then my Emma Knows Money segment where I'm going to teach you how to let go of your child and let them go to college. And we are back with Financial Renaissance with the M's. Thank you for taking part in the conversation with us today. You can text us at 678-613-5857, or you can listen to us live streaming. I know you're about to get out of church. You've been listening to me at church at ssnatl.com, and then you can watch us on Facebook live streaming at Sensation Station Network. And don't forget to follow me on Twitter, IG, Facebook, and YouTube at Emma Knows Money, and also Financial Renaissance. Hey, this week we are going to be going into my top 5 news stories of the week, and then also my Emma Knows Money segment. But first, let's jump into market movers and losers. That's right. Last week, everybody lost. Can I get a boo? No, can't get a boo. All right, so the Dow Jones Industrial Average was down, NASDAQ was down, and the S&P 500 were all down. S&P 500 top gainers was Jefferies Financial Group, Nordstrom's, Concho Resources, SVB Financial Group, and Diamondback Energy. Decliners was Electronic Arts, EA Sports. They were down almost 5% this week. IPG Photonics was down, as well as Rockwell Automation. For NASDAQ, top gainers was Western Digital Corporation, Alphabet Class C, which was Google, Ross Stores, and then Alphabet Class A, and also AMD. NASDAQ top decliners, EA again, Electronic Arts, and BioMarin Pharmaceuticals. The Dow Jones top gainers, Goldman Sachs, United Health Group, Nike made the list, JP Morgan Chase, and Boeing. And then the Dow Jones top losers was 3M, Merck & Company, Johnson & Johnson, Pfizer, and Intel. Now, Recession Watch. Let's look at what's been happening with the 10-year and the 2-year Treasury. It does not look like we are getting closer to a recession. The spreads have kind of spread a little bit more. The 10-year Treasury closed at 2.03%, and the 2-year Treasury closed at 1.86%, which is pretty good. The Dow Jones Home Construction Index closed down almost 2% this week. So that's, again, something that we need to keep watching of, is the 10-year and the 2-year Treasury, and then look at what's happening in the home builder market. All right, sneakerheads, rejoice. Nike was up almost 1%. Adidas and Puma both ended the week down, as well as Under Armour ended the week down as well. Skechers and Foot Locker rounded the week up. Foot Locker with almost a 2% increase from last week to this week. Luxury retail. This is a new segment that we're adding. I've had some requests for, what about us? What about what we wear? Not everybody's into sneakers. Well, great. So Moet, Hennessy, Louis Vuitton, they were down. They trade on the European markets. They were down almost a 0.14%. Ralph Lauren was up. Tapestry and Estee Lauder companies were down, and Tiffany company also ended up, and then the Hermes International ended down as well. And in future weeks, I'm going to be breaking down, because some of these luxury companies, some minorities have decided to protest, right, because of some of the clothing that they've come up with, nooses around sweatshirts and, old-looking, what do you call those, keychains with the black people with big eyes and big lips and things like that. Just a lot of derogatory stuff that kind of, takes us back to a time that we would rather forget about. And so when we're looking at boycotting a company, we need to make sure that that company isn't owned by a group, because there's many luxury items under one umbrella nowadays. So I'll be breaking that down in some future weeks, so you know exactly which companies you want to rock with and who you don't want to rock with. Oil and gas futures were finished up this week, and the precious metals all finished down. So gold finished down, silver finished down, platinum finished down, and copper also finished down. But today I want to tell you a little bit about how you can invest in oil, because people have asked me about oil. And oil is a future, so that what that means is you don't have to take possession of a barrel of oil, but you can buy a barrel of oil for about, let's say, $58. Let's call it $60 a barrel. Now, you don't have to have $60. You only have to have about $20 to buy one barrel of oil. Now, investing in futures market is very, very risky. So investors have a lot of options for getting involved with oil. The methods can come with varying degrees of risk. You can directly invest in oil, meaning you're buying a barrel as a commodity, or you can do it in a brokerage account, okay, with the help of a certified financial planner or a stockbroker. So one method of owning oil is to buy it on the futures market or future options. Now, futures are extremely volatile and involve a high degree of risk. The one thing I will tell you about investing in futures, the upside is great, the downside can crush you. So you as an investor have to make sure that you do your homework and that you have the right amount of capital to invest in the futures markets. Now, another way, a direct way of owning oil is to buy, say, an exchange-traded fund. If you don't know what that is, find a certified financial planner or stockbroker and ask them, but they can get you involved in a exchange-traded fund that invests mainly in oil. You can also look at the global energy sector. There are mutual funds that you can buy into, energy sector mutual funds that do solar power, things of that nature. You can get into the whole energy sector through your 401ks, through your brokers, through your CFPs. You can figure out how to take advantage of stuff. The one thing I will tell you that you may want to take a look at is renewable energy. We know now that buying oil and using oil, gas, things of that nature is actually hurting our climate, our environment. So you may want to take a look at investing into solar, water, things of that nature. When we come back on Financial Renaissance with the M's, we're going to get into my top five news stories of the week. See you in 300 seconds. Financial Renaissance with the M's, yeah. And my top five news stories of the week. Let's talk about there being dissension in the same party. That's right. Senate Republicans are upset. They're actually revolting against the White House. They're rejecting a one-year stopgap funding bill, and they're saying that it's insufficient for the military. Now, remember, Constitution says taxation is supposed to help pay for our military. 15 Senate Republicans are saying that the White House's rules are draconian, and the draconian conditions will hurt the Pentagon, hurt military readiness, and it will also mess up soldiers' pay. So the White House, of course, is blaming Democrats, blah, 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 blah. But there is a bipartisan congressional deal on the table, and they're looking at a 2-year budget, which will carry us through the next election. And this will also prevent a government shutdown, which is on the horizon for this coming September. So if nothing happens, if they can't come to an agreement, $71 billion is going to be shaved from defense spending, and $55 billion is going to be shaved from domestic spending. So we're looking at having, some troubles paying our bills, and if we default, it could actually destabilize the global economy, okay? Want to talk about recession-making moves? Us not paying our bills will be a recession-making move. All right, let's get into the next story and talk about a topic that a lot of people don't want to hear about, and that is climate change. Moody's Analytics say that climate change could cost our country $69 trillion by the year 2100. That's right. So by the end of this century, we're going to have some problems. So Moody's is a major credit rating agency, and so they determine, the health of an economy, the health of municipalities, what happens with workers, and all of that stuff. And they give a grading. They give countries gradings, they give states gradings, they give municipalities gradings, and they either upgrade or downgrade you. Okay, so they're on the lookout. So the Moody's, they just came out with a new report on climate change, and this is one of the first. Okay, and based on this report, it says that if our temperatures go up by an average of 2.7 Fahrenheit degrees, there's going to be almost irreversible harm done to our planet. Moody's is looking at the financial health of companies, municipalities. They're also looking at the harm done to human health and labor productivity, crop yields, and also tourism. So the United States Navy is dredging up their ports to make sure that they're preparing for the rising sea levels. Now, what we have to worry about are going to be water and vector-borne diseases will be the largest direct effects, also malaria and dengue fever. The hardest hit economies are going to be emerging markets, and the hardest hit country is going to be Saudi Arabia. Saudi Arabia is going to be hit the hardest as a result of climate change. Now, I've been wondering, when are the insurance companies going to say enough is enough when it comes to climate change, because they are going to have to pay a pretty penny as well as us. And Chubb, one of the United States' largest insurers, is no longer insuring new policies to coal-fired plants or companies that get more than 30% of their revenues from coals. That's right, coal-related stuff. So coal is out, renewable energy is going to be in. All right, when we come back, we're going to finish up with my top three stories, looking at what's going on with minimum wage, Jay-Z, and then Amazon. Why aren't they paying any taxes? Back with Financial Renaissance with the M's, and we're going over my top 5 news stories of the week. First story had to do with the Senate Republicans. They're upset with the White House and the budget that's being proposed. There's a possibility that we may end up having another government shutdown. When we think about what happened during the last government shutdown, it wasn't good for everybody. We had people that worked for the FBI on bread lines, people that couldn't pay their bills. Again, the average American has less than $400 in their bank account right now. Okay, so we don't need another government shutdown. But here's a story that it should kind of bother you, because it bothers me. Again, the theme of today, because we're talking about the economics of the Revolutionary War, taxation without representation. Tell me how this story sits with you. In 2018, Amazon earned $11 billion in profits. That's after they've paid their overhead, after they've paid for all their employees, after they've paid all their benefits. They earned $11 billion in profits and paid $0 in taxes, okay, zero. A report from the Institute on Taxation and Economic Policy, they call it ITEP, said that this is the second year in a row that Amazon is paying 0% in taxes. Now, part of the reason why they got over like a fat rat this year has to do with the Tax Cuts and Jobs Act of 2017. The Tax Cut and Jobs Act reduced Amazon's federal tax liability from 35% down to 21%. So let's do the math here. So $11.2 billion times 21% comes out to $2.3 billion. What could our government do with $2.3 billion? A whole lot. We'd have better schools, we'd have better infrastructure, and again, I was just complaining about infrastructure, our roads, and we'd have a safety net to take care of the people who couldn't take care of themselves. Some mental health care, some good health care, things like that. Amazon is paying taxes in other countries, but they're not paying taxes here in the great old US of A. So the declining tax revenue by Amazon and a lot of other companies has only widened the deficits, and our national debt has ballooned to over $22 trillion. And for those of you that like to Netflix and chill, Netflix is on this list too for also not paying taxes or having to pay taxes in 2018 because of the Tax Cuts and Jobs Act. So as far as Amazon not paying taxes, they get a trash. That makes me upset, especially when the little people, smaller business owners, people like that have to pay taxes. I don't think that's cool. All right, the $15 an hour income wage increase was being touted around our country. Well, there's over 350,000 low-wage workers who are going to lose $1.5 billion this year. because their states, and these are mostly red states, are blocking the wage increases made by local cities and municipalities. So for each low wage worker, that's going to be about $4,000 each year. And think about $4,000 may not be a lot to you, but for some families, it's the difference between worrying about food, worrying about light bills, worrying about all types of stuff. So 25 states have adopted new laws preventing local municipalities from adopting their own minimum wage laws. They're also blocking employee benefits, sick leave, health care, disability insurance, and retirement benefits. Now, these new laws are affecting women, especially single women, and 60% of minorities. So there's a story about a woman who's 61 years old in St. Louis, Missouri. And she has been making $7 an hour for the last 13 years, okay? She is taking care of her eldest son, who is recovering from a brain tumor, her youngest son, who has autism, and her brother, who is disabled, and herself. And every day she catches 2 buses and a train to work because she cannot afford a car. And again, has been making $7 an hour for the last 13 years. Her city bumped up the minimum wage to $10 an hour. Her company, which is McDonald's, is leaving her at the $10 an hour mark. But she feels that anybody who gets up and goes to work every day should be able to earn a living wage to take care of their families and pay their bills. Douglas, the woman I'm talking about, who's 61, she began working at the age of 12 in her parents' janitorial business. She's not asking for a handout. She just wants her just due. So when we look at the math, with her making $7 an hour, on an annual basis, that comes out to just shy of $15,000. How does a person support 4 people making $15,000 an hour? And even still, we're looking at Missouri going up to that $15 an hour wage, but that's still short of the $16.32 she should be earning on an annual basis. So right now, $16.32 for her would double what she's bringing in and bring her closer to $33,000, which would help her family out immensely. Won't make her rich, it won't even make her middle class, but she'll be above that poverty line. So the states that are not paying into, or that are blocking the local municipalities from adopting their own minimum wage laws, guess who? Alabama, Florida, Iowa, Kentucky, and Wisconsin. Those are some of the states. Go ahead and check into, and of course Missouri, check in and make sure that your state isn't one of the ones that is blocking that. And this study was done by the National Employment Law Project, and for the first time it has quantified the economic impact of prohibiting local wage increases. This is going to have a resounding impact in our economy, and not cool for those 25 states that think that $7 an hour is cool. I say to those lawmakers, you try to live off $7 an hour. Not happening at all. All right. Jigga, what is Jay-Z doing? So Jay-Z is suing a licensing firm for massive fraud. Jay-Z and Roc Nation are suing Iconic Brand Group. Iconic Brand Group, Jay-Z sold Rockaware, the clothing line, to Iconic Brand Group. And Iconic also got a couple of other licensing agreements. They got licensing agreements from Echo, Ed Hardy, and Pony. And they lied about their financials. And what they did was they took off with the money, and they never provided any services. So you haven't seen a Rockaware ad, you haven't seen a lot of Pony stuff. Ed Hardy is all but gone. And Echo, I haven't seen Echo clothing on anybody recently. So Iconic, they absconded with all the licenses. So they got these licensing agreements and then they took off. The Rock sold their men's clothing line, Rockaware, to Iconics for $204 million in 2007. And the company's stocks were doing really good in 2015, but today Iconic stocks are worth less than $1 per share. Now, reason why this is important is because Jay-Z is upset because he was forced to testify in front of the Securities and Exchange Commission. He got subpoenaed, and there were a whole other bunch of unspecified damages that he had occurred because of this. So Iconic was sued over the Rockaware, the rights to use Rockaware and Rock Nation Apparel Group. The names are similar, but they signed a deal for Rockaware, but because Rock Nation signed a deal with New Era for some hats, Iconics got upset. So Iconics is trying to say that Rockaware and Rock Nation are the same, and Jay-Z is like, nah, that it's not the same. The company's claims, and basically they're attempting to rewrite carefully negotiated agreements. So they're not going for it. The attorney of Jay-Z, Alex Spiro, who also, if you Google him, you'll know that he helped out in some other stuff. He's claiming that Jay-Z is being dragged into this case just because he's a celebrity, and that it should be better demonstrated that companies, when you are reading your contracts, if you are doing an agreement with one company, make sure that you understand the name of that company and that you don't try to change things down the road. Now, one thing that Jay-Z did that really, really has me excited is that during these lawsuits, and this happened a couple of years ago, Jay-Z halted the lawsuit by pointing out that there was a lack of black arbitrators. So when you're involved in a lawsuit, sometimes it's better to kind of go to the mediation table. It's a lot cheaper than going to court and having a jury determine whether or not this group should win money over that group. And a lot of times, a jury of your peers isn't necessarily a jury of your peers, especially when we're talking about economics and wealth. So what Jay-Z did was they were supposed to have an arbitrator. They were supposed to pick 4 arbitrators, but Jay-Z pointed out that out of the arbitrators that were given to them, they were supposed to go through a list of 12. They were supposed to choose 4 on each side. And what Jay-Z saw was that out of all the arbitrators, he couldn't find a single African-American arbitrator that did either a large case or a complex case on the roster. And additionally, he took that observation that basically out of all the arbitrators, he wouldn't be represented. He wouldn't be represented properly, because if you don't have people of your same color, your same wealth, how are they going to be able to fairly make a decision about you? So he said that there was an unbias of white arbitrators towards black defendants, and that if it was unresolved, the issue would deprive black litigants like Jay-Z and his companies of equal protection of the laws. The court ended up upholding his petition, and the arbitration was paused until they were able to get the proper arbitrators in the case. So, see, this right here is something that should be front page news. And if you have a court case dealing with your business, you have the right to have your lawyer look at this case and use this case as a basis for making sure that if there's somebody that's going to be deciding or making a decision on your case, that they either A, look like you, or they come from the same background as you. So you don't want somebody that is lower class or middle class or under the poverty level making a decision about your business, because for certain people, they're going to look at you and your wealth or what you've accumulated from all of your hard years of working, and they're going to say that it's enough. You should be satisfied with what you have, and that's the wrong way of looking at it. It's not a you should be satisfied with what you have. It should be, is under the rule of the law, should I win this case based on a person doing something wrong, or should I lose the case because I haven't proved my facts? It shouldn't be based on race, and it shouldn't be based on, you thinking that we have enough based on the color of our skin. So kudos to Jay-Z for actually putting a kibosh on that. He's also suing Iconic for all of his legal fees having to do with being dragged in front of the Securities and Exchange Commission. It also kind of defamed his name, tarnished his brand a little bit, so it's going to be interesting to continue to watch how this case plays out in the courtrooms. That's how we do stuff these days. We fight in court, not in the streets. When we come back in 300 seconds, my Emma Knows Money, and I'm going to be telling you and your college-bound student how to emotionally prepare yourselves to let go. We are back. We're Financial Renaissance with the M's. It is one of my favorite segments. This segment of Emma Knows Money is brought to you by AARP. So this segment has to do with how to prepare your kids and yourself emotionally as they transition on into the college world. Number one, help your kids enhance their problem-solving skills. As parents, myself included, we become helicopter parents, and we like to try to help our kids solve every problem. Part of the reason why they break down so much is because they don't have the proper problem-solving skills. And the lack of problem-solving skills has been linked to mental health problems, depression, anxiety, suicide, etc. So you want to talk to your kids about problem solving, brainstorm solutions with them, review pros and cons of problem solving, and pick a solution and see if it works. So you want to start doing this with them now before they go off to college. Then the second thing you want to do is talk to them about strategies of managing uncomfortable emotions. College is going to be full of uncomfortable emotions. As high school students, sometimes they're heroes. They get to college and then they're zeros. People treat them like crap. Nobody knows who they are. College students don't know how to deal with anger, frustration, especially loneliness, fear, and disappointment. So identify concrete coping skills with them. Calling a friend, working out, journaling is a good one, and teach them a hobby, not necessarily playing video games, because video games can also add to their stress levels. The third thing you want to do is encourage taking positive action. And I'm going to repeat this. This is both for parents and for the kids. Encourage taking positive action. Make sure that your young adult recognizes that they have the power to make a difference. You want them, if you're feeling bad or things aren't going right, do something that's going to make you feel good. And usually that's by helping other people. Volunteer at a soup kitchen. Go to an assisted living facility and help elderly neighbors who may need help. If you are living in a neighborhood and there's an elderly person that may need help with their yard work, volunteer to help them with their yard work. And share how positive action impacts your community. Tell them to tweet about that, or Facebook or Snap about the positive things that they're doing, so that they get positive reinforcement back. They need it. And you as parents, when you're talking to your kids, cut down on the guilt and a lot of that stuff. Remember, talk about the positive things that they're doing and reinforce those. Now, inspire awe. Awe teaches young people that their problems are fairly insignificant in the grand scheme of life. So you want them to do awe-inspiring things. So get out, go for a hike. Let them go on vacation to a new place if you can afford it. If not, they can save up money, or they can travel to some place in the United States that they don't have to pay a lot of money. But if they can, fill up a tank of gas, drive somewhere for 2 hours, let them go somewhere new. And then they can read about people who have overcome hurdles and went on to do great things. So think about books. If you are part of the iPhone family, you know that you can have books in your library that you can also share with your kids. And you're going to want to give them some autobiographies and biographies to read, because they need to know that they're not alone. Now, boosting their confidence to stand their ground. It's teaching them boundaries, and we need to teach young men and young women how to say no and be comfortable with saying no. It is important that our young people learn how to say no. College is going to be full of peer pressure. And if you don't believe me, look at the average grades for college freshmen. Okay, this is an awakening for them. So young people don't always grasp the gravity of the consequences of their actions. They're not full-grown adults yet. So there's still going to be a disconnect about consequences. And as parents, dial it back a little bit. You remember what it was like to be 18 and out of your house for the first time with no rules, no regulations, no parents, breathing down your neck. Think back to what things were like when you were young and share your experiences. That's right. If they're over 18, go ahead and share some of your experiences with them. And also, remember that young people think that they're invincible and that they're going to want to impress their friends. So you want to stop them from doing that. Encourage goal setting. That's something that we did in our household. Discuss concrete goals for the academic year, goals for staying healthy, making friends, and especially managing stress. Encourage them to write their goals down and evaluate their progress throughout the year. So when they call you complaining about something, switch that conversation to, hey, where are you at when it comes to your goals? And it will help you and help them. And talk to them about what can be done when they feel that their goals aren't being met. It's going to be a lot of pressure when they go to school. Now, for parents, it is time to let go. College is the time for differentiation, individualization, and personal development. Your young adult can't become an adult with you breathing over their neck and micromanaging every decision that they make. Losing that constant connectivity is going to be tough on both sides. I left my son's room door closed for a whole semester because in my mind I still needed to think that he was in the room. It's not healthy to talk multiple times per day with your kids or to text nonstop with them or for your kids to come home every weekend so that they can be with you. Give your kids a time to grow up without you and trust that they already have strong roots and that they've been watching you. Those are my tips for parents and the young adults about to embark into the college world on M&O's money. And we are back with Financial Renaissance with the M's. We had a great show today. Like, again, this is one of my favorite times of the year. And again, it started back in 1976 when I was 6 or 7 years old and thought that the 4th of July celebration every year would be this bang up, bang down, all out, no expense spared celebration in our country. Only to realize that that only happens once every 100 years. I was fortunate enough to take a part of it, and I feel every 4th of July I get super excited about the country that I'm from. I get super excited about where I live, and I'm glad that I was born on this side of the border. We don't get to choose, but, glad my parents met in high school and, broke curfew and all that other stuff. So some of the things that takeaways from today's show has to do with the racism in our country, and the racism in our country really has its roots in the European divide. When Europe was fighting in the 15th century, 16th century, 17th century, a lot of those issues actually transpired or came across the Atlantic here to our shores. Remember, Great Britain was the dominant force in the world at the time, and every other group that came to the Americas after the Brits were looked down upon. So the Irish, the Polish, if you were Scandinavian, if you were Portuguese, Spanish, Italian, every single group of people was disparaged or taken down. So keep that in mind when we think about racism, when we think about the Spanish people on the West Coast. Think about the fact that Spain, European Spain, settled a lot of the country west of the Mississippi. So when we look at the Arizonas, the New Mexicos, the Texas, the Californias, all of those states on the West Coast, remember that they have deep roots with Mexico, they have deep roots with Central America, and they have deep Spain, Spanish, European roots. That's why there's a little bit of a disparity. And remember, if people were once on this land and we've taken it over, they're still going to consider it their homeland. That's just par for the course. And then we looked at the economics of our great country and how we are rooted in fighting about taxes. We are rooted in fighting about not paying our fair share, things of that nature. And then from taxation, it is a powder keg in our country. Who should be paying more and who's not paying enough? Always going to be an issue, and this is something we need to stay on top of our lawmakers about. If you feel that you're paying more taxes than a corporation that brings in $11 billion in profits, then that needs to be a phone call to somebody. That's not something that we should just read or hear about and go on about our business. I work hard every day. My team works hard every day. We all have to pay our fair share of taxes. As a small business owner, I feel I pay more than my fair share, but I'm not going to say anything about that. I will call my representatives in Washington, and I will also talk to my local state representatives about the taxation on the state level as well as on the federal level. That's right. I want to thank Karen Holly. What is this? Unlearn by Humble the Poet. It's a good book for everyone learning new coping techniques. For college and students and parents. I appreciate that. Where were you 4 years ago when I was crying my eyes out because my son went away to college and left me home by myself? Karen. All right. So Miss Holly has two young ladies that she successfully got out of her house into college and into the workforce, and they are now productive members of society. So shout out to you and your mini-me's for doing the right thing. On the way, we have Smooth Sensational Sunday, and followed up by Connecting the Dots with Lee Watts at 4 o'clock. As always, my financial knowledge seekers, one heart, one love, and please, let's put country over party. Thank you.